This video was brought to you by the lovely members of my Patreon.
The last time I talked about this, I got in a lot of trouble, and I am suspecting that I will potentially get into a lot of trouble this time again. Hey guys, it's Kat and it's time for another episode of True Tea. Thank you so much for coming back and joining me here for yet another episode of True Tea. We upload these videos every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I appreciate those of you guys who come back every single week. So how have you guys been? What have you guys been up to? How have you been since I last saw you? I've been really interesting. I went to a digital goth party tonight, and that was really fun, and I'm just filming videos after because I feel like it. So yeah, have you guys been going to these digital like club parties? I find them to be really fun and amazing. It's been really great for me to reconnect with people who I haven't seen in forever, who I used to see all the time at the goth club. So I'm really curious how you guys feel about these digital events and if you guys feel like they're, you know, worth your time. I'll be honest, I definitely feel a little bit drained by a lot of these like Zoom hangouts, but at the same time, I appreciate them and they are kind of my source of socialization these days. So I'm really curious how you guys are holding up in the quarantine. So yeah, anyway, we're gonna be having a conversation about polyamory, harems, and the one dick policy. But before we do, I would highly suggest that you go to your kitchen and grab yourself something to drink. I actually don't quite know what this is. I have an Imperfect Foods subscription, which don't necessarily love, but I got some lemons with it. And so I squeezed some lemon juice, put some gin in there and a couple of sugar cubes, and hopefully this tastes good. Ooh, it's actually quite refreshing. So yeah, let me know what's in your mug or your glass in the comment box below. Anyway, let's take another sip and let's get right into this conversation. So this is something that I'm really nervous talking about because, to be completely honest with you guys, the last time I talked about this, I got in a lot of trouble, and I am suspecting that I will potentially get into a lot of trouble this time again. But you know, you guys know that True Tea is kind of the thing that we do on this channel, where I just come to you guys honestly and share, you know, even the most ugly things that I've experienced, even some of the most uncomfortable things that I've experienced, because I always feel like there's often a lesson within those experiences. So, you know, either way, I feel like whether this gets me shit or not, it's a fun story to tell, so let's tell it. So here's the thing. When I was getting into polyamory, the most, I don't know, I would say the most popular, but like the most well-known representation of polyamory was this one guy who had a lot of girls who were completely dedicated to him and no one else, right? And to be completely honest with you guys, when I was younger and I was running into these men who identified as polyamorous before I identified as polyamorous, it was a lot of guys like that, men who were seemingly just collecting all of these women. Those women are dating him, but they're not dating anyone else. He can go and date whoever the hell he wants. He can go and do whatever the hell he wants to do. But those women are only dating him and are completely and utterly and totally devoted to him exclusively. And I was really put off by that, you know. So when I was initially, you know, thinking about being polyamorous and questioning whether or not I was, I knew that that's not what I wanted. I knew that that's not a dynamic that I would want to be in. And so I think it was hard for me to come into my polyamory because I didn't understand that there were more forms of poly than just that one, right? But early on into my life in the poly world, I did indeed run into a man like that. And that's kind of the story I wanted to tell you guys in this video. So I feel like I do a lot of repeating myself when it comes to these things, but I always assume that people have never seen my video. Some people are just for the first time clicking on this video. They don't know who the hell I am. So I guess I will reintroduce myself yet again. I'm sorry for those of you guys who are faithful True Tea watchers who have to hear this every single week. But my name is Kathryn. I'm 29 years old. I'm a trans woman. I'm polyamorous, and I am in the BDSM community. That is a part of the way that I socialize. It is a part of the way that I build my friendships and connections. And when I was first getting into the BDSM community, I was just out of a very monogamous relationship. I was still figuring out if polyamory was something that was for me. I had felt that I was polyamorous. I had a friend who gave me a copy of The Ethical Slut when I was in college. I promptly threw it away because I thought he was calling me a slut. And being a slut, of course, was a bad thing for me back then. But, you know, I had a lot of hesitations. And so I did a lot of going out into both the poly and the BDSM community with a lot of curiosity to see if maybe it's something that I could potentially identify with. And obviously part of me doing this was trying to see if I could find polyamorous people, kinky people who had functioning relationships that were healthy. Right? And while BDSM had always been part of my life, while I had always had some sort of interaction with it, I did not necessarily know if I could overlook previous trauma, which we won't get into in this video. Watch this video where I go into that, and have it also be part of my life. So these were two things I was exploring at the same time. I just want to establish that right away. So when I was in Orange County, there was this little dungeon that no longer exists, and I started going to events there. Now, when I was first getting out of my relationship, you guys have to understand, I was really trying to reconnect with who I was. You know, I had really distanced myself from the person who I was when I met my ex, and I was really just trying to get back in touch with my sexuality, back in touch with my body, you know, just who I was as a person, you know, on my own, right? And so I walked into a lot of these spaces being very, very, very shy. And I went to this BDSM dungeon, and it's really funny for me to think about it now, because I used to go to these BDSM dungeons and I would like walk around, I would literally walk around like this, or sometimes like this, because I was so nervous and so shy and so unsure of whether or not this was for me. And I remember going to the dungeon I'm thinking about right now and literally thinking, what do people get out of this? Like, it was interesting to me, it was sexy to me, it was intriguing to me, but I couldn't help but think, like, what do people get out of this? What do you get out of getting tied up and spanked and all of that stuff? You know, I didn't really get it, but I could tell that it was something that I was drawn to, right? Now, at this dungeon, there were always these doms who would come. And, you know, when you're new in the BDSM community, especially if you're a woman, it's really common for these doms to be almost a little too excited to play with you. Now, of course, when you're in the community for a little bit longer, you kind of start to understand that the guys who are very eager to play with you are not really the right guys to play with. But that all being said, it's definitely a fact of life. And when you're there and you're new, you don't really know any better. And I certainly didn't know any better, right? So because I was so shy, because I was so nervous, I went to a lot of BDSM dungeons and just observed. You know, I would walk through and men would offer to do scenes with me, but I would just say, yeah, I'm just here observing, you know? And there was this guy who always came to this particular dungeon, and he always came there with his two submissives. And this guy was an educator. He was the kind of guy who, he had an air about him, you know? He had this just like confident, sexy air about him, and you could watch him play and you knew that he was good at what he did. You know, he was a flogger. If you guys don't know what flogs are, they are, you know, the little leather straps that you would, you know, throw and do all the things with, right? And I would watch him do these just honestly beautiful scenes with his submissives. And it was always just such an intriguing sort of thing. So you can imagine little, you know, vanilla me trying to be sexy, sitting there and like watching and being very shy and being very unsure, but being also really, really intrigued and enthralled, right? So now this guy taught classes, and I had said for the longest time that I was going to take one of his classes, but I just never really got around to doing it. Plus back then, living in Orange County rather, most of the events were in LA, right? this one dungeon that I was going to at the time of me going there, because it's a little bit better now. At the time of me living in Orange County, there was really only this one dungeon, right? And if I wanted to go and take one of his classes, I would have to go all the way out to LA, and you guys know that I don't drive. So it was always just one of those things that I'd said to myself, oh, when I get to LA, when I get the chance to do it, I will try to take one of his classes, right? So I moved to LA, and I'm finally in a position where I'm in LA, I'm close to things, I'm local enough, I can start taking advantage of a lot of the local events. When I first moved to LA, I'd gone to a couple of events in LA, but I was really unfamiliar with the scene in general. I used to go to this male dominant, female submissive night at this dungeon, and that was the only event I had gone to at this particular dungeon. And so I wanted to try one of the other events. And so they had this newbie event where you could kind of go to different stations and get your little taste testing going and things like that. And I was really, really excited to kind of explore some stuff that I hadn't really experienced, because especially back then, especially back when this story happened, I really didn't have a ton of experience. I was doing things with Nathan, but Nathan is more of a ropes guy. He's more of a tie you up kind of guy. He's not really an impact play guy. Like, he can do it, but it's not really his thing. You know what I mean? So yeah, I was really excited to try some new things, right? So I go to this event, and there is the guy, right? We're just gonna give him a name because it's gonna make it easier. We're gonna call this guy Sebastian. Not his name at all, not even close to his name, but we're gonna call him Sebastian, right? So Sebastian is there, and he is demoing paddles, right? I got my paddle right over here, actually. This is one of my paddles. This is by Edge Play Gear. I had it on the floor for some reason, but he's demoing paddles right now. Back then, I'd never experienced a paddle before. And I was really nervous, but also very excited and very curious. And so I walked up to him and asked if he was willing to demo paddles on me. Now, I was very aware of the fact that Sebastian had seen me before. Sebastian has come up to me directly and in a very professional way, asked if I wanted to come and take some of his classes. And so, I was kind of like, this is just a good guy who is probably willing to help, That was my vision of him, a nice guy who wanted to help, right? But to be honest with you guys, I was attracted to Sebastian. Sebastian had a way of carrying himself that I found to be really, really attractive. Just to give you an idea of what Sebastian looked like. I mean, this is going to sound really stereotypical, but Sebastian basically had a really sort of biker look. He was kind of a strong, bigger guy who you could just, when he did his little flogging situation, it was like watching art, He was so good at it. He was so artistic and free and lovely with it that, it was hard to not watch him and be just completely entranced by what he was doing, right? But of course, tonight he's demoing paddles, which I've never seen him use, but I'm sure he knows what he's doing, right? And so, I definitely walked up to him, with the thought of him as a teacher. Of course, I was attracted to him, but I was looking at him as like just a helpful guy who was going to help me feel this sensation, right? So this is where the story gets a little complicated, right? So I get on the horse, and he gives me a couple of smacks, a bunch of smacks, and I go completely in the zone. I don't know how long we were there, but it felt like we were there for a while, right? And when I left the scene, I was just in this sort of space of happiness and contentness. And, when he picked me up and he, pulled me up and brought me back to space a little bit, he was like, hey, if you're interested in taking some of my classes, I do private things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Add me on social media, and maybe that's a thing we could do sometime, right? And so I walk away, and I'm in a great mood, and I, get out off of the station, and he's off to do the next thing. Now, here's the thing I didn't understand at the time. And I'm sure if you're a BDSMer, you kind of already probably know where this is going. Now, I think a lot of people listening to this story are probably, and aren't in the BDSM community, are probably already confused. They probably don't understand why BDSMers try to go to these clubs and do these things, right? What a lot of people are chasing when they go to BDSM clubs and they get spanked and they do all these things, is what comes after all of that, right? We call it subspace or bottom space, depending on what your relationship is with your partner and what your personal position is. I'm a sub, I'm a bottom, so I was slipping into what I did not understand at the time was bottom space. And it's complicated. I mean, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it, but bottom space kind of feels like, it's kind of what it feels like to be exhausted after a workout that you didn't think you could complete. It feels kind of like that. It also really feels like you're high. It really feels like you smoked a little bit of weed or something and you're just totally zen and totally chill and just really, really relaxed because you've experienced this thing. It was exhausting and now you're just in smiley mode, right? And it is kind of like a drug, which is why so many people do it so frequently, right? But what I didn't really understand about bottom space / subspace is that it also leaves you in a very, very vulnerable position. Now, it's customary in a lot of BDSM relationships to have what we call aftercare. Aftercare is what it sounds like. It's what you do after the scene, right? So for example, if you do a really intense spanking scene with somebody, you will, give them a bit of a cuddle, give them a bit of a time to sort of come back to earth, so to speak. Now, because Sebastian was working at this event as, a dude hosting a booth, he didn't have time to give me aftercare. He just sort of let me out into the population, and that was basically that. So I'm walking around this BDSM club, one of the first ones I've been to, and I'm just in the greatest mood, right? Now, the way this BDSM club works is you can't use your phone anywhere in the club except for the smoking patio, right? So because I knew for a fact I wanted to play with this guy again, I immediately went on social media and added him as a friend, right? Now, as I'm sitting out there, as I'm sitting on the smoking patio, adding him as a friend, Sebastian comes outside and sits right by me, right? And we're sort of smiling and nodding at each other, but we're not really having a conversation, right? So then I go on social media because I'm out there on my phone and I see that he's accepted my request and he sent me a message. And in that message, he sent me his phone number. He said, hey, this is a better way to get in contact with me, even though, I told you to add me here. Now, mind you, we're sitting right next to each other and he knows that I just sent him a message and he knows that I'm out here on my phone, but he's not speaking directly to me.
Hey, this is Editing Kathryn, and I actually realized as I was editing this that I didn't really expand on this particular point, which I suppose to some degree is a little bit relevant here. So you'll see where this story is going, but I found out a lot later that he was always interested in me ever since he had seen me at those old dungeons, but his partners, one of his partners, always had a lot of discomfort with him pursuing me. And so a lot of what he was doing by being sneaky and by, hey, add me on social media and then sending me a DM saying you could, just kind of hit me up here. A lot of that was him basically trying to get around his partner, and talk to me directly, in a way where she wouldn't entirely know. And as you will hear later on in the story, when I did kind of what I ended up doing, she was not a fan of that. I don't really go deep into that, but I feel like it's important to add onto this part of the story before we get further, just so you guys have a bit of context for exactly why that was sus.
Now, this should have been one of my signs. This should have been one of my red flags. But, I was in such a great mood that I wasn't really thinking about it, right? So Sebastian gets up, he goes back and does his job, and I'm just in, oh God, I turn into a little nymph, you know? I'm just walking around, just feeling really happy and friendly, and just everything's great, everything's good. If you've ever experienced subspace or bottom space, you know what this feels like. And you know especially what it feels like when you don't have anyone there helping you handle it, right? So I'm just walking around and I see this guy that I saw at the male dominant female submissive event that obviously was interested in me. I knew he was interested in me, and I've seen him play. I knew he was a good player. I was in total subspace happy smiling mode. He asked me to do a scene, and up to this point when he'd asked me in the past, I'd said no. But because I was in such a great mood and I really, really enjoyed the thing I just had with Sebastian, and I honestly felt like I didn't really get enough, I was like, sure, I know this guy, I've seen this guy, I know he's good at what he does, he can give me a scene. And he gave me a really, really, really good scene at the time. And he does that scene with me, we hug and cuddle for a little bit, and I'm still on cloud 9. It's like that scene we just did just kind of restarted it up again, right? Now, there was this guy that I ran into right when I came into the event. He was obviously kind of flirty or whatever, but I wasn't really necessarily paying attention to it. Him and I started talking again, and we had this mutual friend who threw parties out in North Hills, and apparently she was throwing one tonight. And he was like, hey, I'm gonna go to this party. Do you wanna come to this party with me? We know the same person. Let's see what they're up to, right? Now, me, without being on Subspace, would say no to this because this was a strange dude who I'd never met, who I do not know, who only claims to know the person that I know, right? But because I was in such a happy, friendly, compliant mood, when this guy who I knew was interested in me, who I may or may not have been slightly interested in, said, hey, want to come to this party with me? I was like, yeah, sure, why not, right? So we get into this car, and we go to this party, and of course, as soon as we get to the party's ending, and they're kicking everybody out already, right? So that's a womp, womp, womp. But of course, it's LA. There's all these other parties going on. There's all these other things to do. And so he decided to take me to another dungeon up in the valley. And we went to that party, and I won't get into that party because honestly, lots of shady things happen at that particular space, but that's not this video. But we went to that party, and that party was completely dead. And without getting into the whole story of it, I didn't have a formal conversation with this guy about me being transgender, and we had that conversation there. I told him, and it wasn't like we didn't really leave on like a bad foot, but it was definitely like hey, I'm not into that kind of thing. And honestly, I didn't care. I didn't really care. I was having a great time. I was giddy as fuck. I was going from place to place to place. I was in a really good mood. So when he said, not really my thing, I was like, cool, awesome, whatever, right? He offered to drive me home after that, but there was this we saw this couple go in right when we were starting to have that conversation. And by the time the conversation ended, that couple kind of came out. Now, it was a couple and this guy, right? And they were all kind of like clearly looking for a good time, clearly trying to figure out what was going on. They also went to the dungeon. The dungeon was closed. And they came out and they were like, hey, do you guys want to come with us? We're going to, go back to our place and, party or whatever. Now, again, me not on Subspace would probably say no to this and say, no, this isn't really what I want. But in that moment, in my little happy giddy space, a party sounded like a really, really good idea. In fact, the party sounded like exactly what I needed after, going all the way to the valley with this dude who doesn't really like me after he took me to 2 parties that aren't popping. You know what I mean? Like a party, especially because where they lived was closer to where I lived. It was actually taking me back towards where I, was, and it would have avoided all the awkwardness of him dropping me off at home. So, it was kind of a win-win for me, so I decided to go to this party with them. Now, I didn't understand, and we've talked about this before, I didn't understand at the time that a lot of times when a couple ask you to hang out with them after the party. They're trying to fuck you. I didn't understand that at the time. And when we got there, they had apparently been just off their rocker on ecstasy and they were feeling real frisky. And that guy that was with them was their third for the evening and they were looking for a fourth. And we've talked about this before, but katblaque may be, you know, a sapphic ally, but she is strictly dickly. She is strictly dickly. And so as flattered as I was, and she was gorgeous, right? She was really, really pretty. No. I mean, he was cute, but like, no. I also was not in the mood for sex, you know, like, let's avoid all the compatibility things. I didn't want to get fucked. I wanted to have a fun time, you know, especially back then, right? So anyway, I leave that party and I get into an Uber and I take my ass on home like I should have done hours ago. And the next day there is this other BDSM event, right? And I go to this other BDSM event and I do a scene with one of my friends. Now, the relationship that I have with Nathan is one where Nathan really enjoys hearing about all of these experiences. So I actually told Nathan about all of these experiences I had. I told him about how I really like paddles, how I discovered this new thing about me, how I did this. I told him all the stuff I did. And Nathan had a really positive reaction. Nathan, because he met me, Nathan met me when I was getting out of my monogamous relationship and was feeling very sexually stifled, very stifled kink-wise. So he really appreciates seeing me grow and try new things and sort of do things with other people. So he loved hearing all about it. So I thought on that I should text Sebastian and see how he felt about it, right? Now, Sebastian had explained to me when we were talking about playing before that the way he likes to do things is he has, you know, people who he demos for. He's got people who he teaches and things like that. But if I was interested in a more intimate scene, if I was interested in more from him, I would have to be one of his partners. And the way that he personally works is he has a bunch of submissives who are all women, who only play with him, are completely exclusively kinky and all these other things with him and no one else, right? He's basically free to go out there and rope whoever in, but the girls who he is topping for cannot bottom for any other dominant, any other guy, right? Now, I'm a very live and let live kind of person. If you like it, I love it. If that works for you, that works for you. But of course, because I was already in a relationship with Nathan, I wasn't about to, as amazing as that scene was, I wasn't about to drop my relationship with Nathan to get into one with Sebastian, especially when I don't know him super well, you know? Like, I didn't want to be in a position where I give him my all and my everything because we had one decent scene where he didn't really take care of me, right? So when we first started having that conversation, I said basically, hey, you know, I'll get back to you basically. And so when I told him about all of these things, I wasn't really expecting him to have a negative reaction because we weren't together or anything like that. We had literally just met, you know, so I didn't think that my involvement with other people would bother him. But when I told him about this, he said to me, well, it seems like you get around a lot. And you guys have to understand, at that point in my life, I was, you know, I was not really comfortable even being openly and outwardly sexual. As much as that may surprise you, I was not comfortable doing that yet. I was still very much in this sort of space of, well, you know, I don't really know if it's a thing I want to show other people. I'm unsure of even what I like and what I want. And I had just started to get to a point where I was more sure of that stuff. And so for me to share this with him and for him to have such a negative reaction of, well, it seems like you get around a lot, it really fucking pissed me off. And I really, truly did not understand where that was coming from, right? Now, earlier in the video, I told you guys that I have had issues talking about this in the past, and that's what we're gonna talk about here, because basically what happened is I was keeping, I was writing a lot on my private, my private social medias about my journey in kink, right? And so I was doing a lot of like having these experiences and writing them down and publishing them and things like that among my friend group and things. And I wrote this sort of, I guess you could say, article about my experience with him, but I was being incredibly vague. I was not being specific about where it was and who it was and all these different things. But I had mentioned in the thing I posted that I had met this guy who had a harem, and he wanted me to only do BDSM with him while he was free to do BDSM with basically anyone. And I published it the night that we sort of had that little shitty text exchange, and I went to bed feeling a lot better about the whole situation because I'd gotten it out onto the piece of paper. And one of the things I learned that was kind of a catalyst for me starting the blog post is that for me, poly and kink are so intertwined, but I realized that for a lot of people, they are not. And that was really one of my first experiences, not only seeing that, but also seeing that a lot of men really do have a one dick policy or a one dom policy with the BDSM community, right? And it was just a moment of me recognizing that that was completely incompatible with what I was personally looking for. So I wrote about that, right? Went to bed, felt better about it, was excited to wake up the next day without it on my mind, right? So I wake up the next day and I've got a bunch of missed calls, a bunch of text messages. I've got 2 messages on my social media from his submissive, and I could tell just from the very beginning of what I could see when you're looking at the message that they were angry messages, and I really didn't understand why. Now, he was texting me and he was really, really pissed off at me. He was like, why did you write that? Why did you publish that? Why are you trying to ruin my reputation? And I genuinely did not understand where he was coming from. I wrote something that in my opinion was very, very vague, that wasn't specific, that didn't deliberately and specifically talk about him. And somehow, some way, for whatever reason, it still upset him, right? So I decided to call him on the phone because he was asking me to delete it. And I was like, I'm not going to delete my, journaling about my growth in kink. I'm not going to do that. Even if it does involve you, I'm not going to fucking do that, right? And so I get him on the phone and I'm asking him why he's so upset. And he says apparently he is like the only guy in LA who refers to his girls as a harem. He is the only guy in all of Los Angeles who calls his partners a harem. Which of course I knew was not true, but I'm new to the community. I don't really know all of these things. I don't really understand half of this shit. He really, really tries to correct and quantify what he actually meant, right? And he keeps trying to make the point that what he actually meant was that your kink is your kink and my kink is my kink. Because I was spanked by another guy and went to 2 parties with this other guy and went to this other party on my own. In his mind, that is my kink. My kink is not being devoted to him. My kink is just basically being out there and doing all the things and being reckless and da-da-da-da-da-da, right? Which of course is not my kink, but that's how he was framing it. And he says to me, and this was really honestly one of the more terrifying aspects of the conversation, he says to me, would you judge somebody for wanting to kill people and have sex with animals? And I say, without even skipping a beat, you're damn right I would. I would absolutely judge somebody for wanting to kill people and wanting to sleep with animals. Like, I totally would. I think most of our profiles say, no kids, no poop, no animals, It's a normal thing to be judgmental to people for that reason, right? So I say that to him and he says, well, if you want to be part of the BDSM community, you need to accept that some people are going to be into stuff that you're not into. That's part of it. And part of being in this space is accepting that people like that exist. Now, of course, in so many ways, he's not wrong. You know, I mean, there are a lot of kinks that make me incredibly uncomfortable, right? But that doesn't mean that those kinks are bad. That doesn't mean that those kinks are wrong. They're just kinks that make me uncomfortable. And I think as I get older, I really do recognize that, you know, your thing is your thing, my thing is my thing. Neither of us are necessarily correct, but we both can respect each other's space, right? But the way he was saying it was very much in the tone of like, you know, like I was a 22-year-old who had never been to anything like this, and he was just gonna tell me how it is. And if I want to be part of this community, I need to be okay with that sort of shit. When really what we were talking about was him slut-shaming me for getting spanked by another person. For the way he was slut-shaming me, I wish I'd actually sucked a few dicks. Like, I wish I'd actually done something, because all I did was get spanked by another guy and go to a couple of parties. That's it. That is it. That is literally as far as it got. He started threatening me. He was like, if you don't delete your post, I'm gonna go tell the owner of the dungeon that I used to go to all the time, that you made this post, and you're gonna be disinvited from all of the events. Now, of course, with time, I learned that that particular person is not necessarily quick to oust people based on rumors, based on even things that happen on FetLife. They genuinely could care less. They regularly host events with abusers. Not here to talk about that. But long story short, he was basically trying to do this thing where me, as somebody who was new, you know, I would hear that and be scared. I would hear that and be nervous. And so I would bend to his whims, right? I would bend to his complete and utter whims, right? And, you know, it was just a really interesting sort of thing for me to see. That was my first physical in-person experience with the kind of guy who had a harem of women who were completely devoted to him, you know, while he wasn't completely devoted to them, you know what I mean? Not in the same way. And one of the things I realized, one of the things I saw really, really clearly in that was that a lot of the times, these kind of guys are insecure. You know, I do know people who are in similar types of polyamorous relationships where there's one guy and there's like 3 girls and they all get along and it's all great and it's all awesome and everyone, you know, that does exist, and it does exist in a healthy way. But for so many of these guys, it's all about reinforcing their insecurities, right? If they have all of these women around them saying that, you know, they love them and care about him and things like that, he's amazing, he's the best lover, it's all just reinforcing him as a person, and he needs that. Not only does he need that, but he needs that from more than one person. And oftentimes when people feel like that, they're very, 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 very sensitive to how their image is seen, right? In so many ways, that post would have been seen by nobody. No one would have been able to put pieces together, but he had to come out and basically say, hey, this is about me, delete it. And all that did was make him look guilty. All that did was make him look not so great. Like, you know, it drew attention to it more than it probably would have had he just left it the fuck alone, right? But he was so fragile in his own self-image that he needed me to delete that. He needed me to get rid of it so that he could feel better about himself. It's sad, you know? And honestly, a lot of times those relationships don't last, you know? Like, unfortunately for me, I've seen so many poly relationships, even in like the short period of time I've lived in Los Angeles, crash and burn, completely crash and burn, because in truth, one of the partners was just really, really insecure, and they didn't want to have polyamorous relationships because, you know, they actually believed they could be in love with more than one person. They were polyamorous because they needed that amount of people saying that they loved them for them to feel valuable, you know, and there's really nothing wrong with needing that reinforcement, but I do think that there's something wrong where you need it to the point of limiting what your partners can do, especially when you guys are both identifying as polyamorous, you know what I mean? I understand for him that his stance with BDSM is, if you're gonna bottom for me, you should only bottom for me. Totally cool, totally get it, and I do respect it, right? But at the same time, I'm not a bad person or a dirty person or a person who doesn't get it, because that's not particularly what I'm personally into, you know? It's not even really a your kink is your kink and my kink is my kink sort of situation. It's more like, hey, you know, these things are just diametrically opposed to who I am. So I do respect where you're at, but I'm where I am, you know what I mean? I think if you're gonna get into a relationship like that, it should be a relationship that makes sense, you know? If you're only dating people because you want them to reinforce you, you know, if your reason for dating them is that they make you feel safe and you need to have two of them and they can never be with anyone else, or it's gonna make you feel less safe, as much as that's an understandable emotion, I really think it's worth thinking about and examining and questioning why you feel that way. Because I think oftentimes when you start to unpack those insecurities, you realize pretty fast that they don't really make a lot of sense. If you love someone and they love you back, them dating someone else or seeing someone else really doesn't subtract from that, unless it does. You know, it shouldn't if you're both polyamorous, but if you're not, then yeah. Anyway, I'm just blabbing right now. I just find that more often than not, people in those types of relationships are very, very, very insecure and in desperate need of validation that they can't get for themselves, and that is not healthy. These people tend to be really obsessed with monitoring their image and how they come across and what their reputation is. And obviously those things are not unimportant. I think that for Sebastian, those things are incredibly important as a person who's an educator, especially in the kinky BDSM community. Like, that's all important, right? At the same time, right? At the same time, I don't think it should be so important that it's at a complete detriment to, you know, your relationships. You know what I mean? So anyway, on that note, I think I've said everything I want to say. If you guys made it through this entire video, please put this emoji in the comment section below. I would really, really, really greatly appreciate it. And so yeah, I will see you guys next week. Right now you're looking at 2 videos you can watch if you would like to continue to sip true tea right here on the channel. And in the bottom corners, there are several ways you can send me a tip. And you can send me a package if that's something you'd like to send me. I promise I won't share it. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.